I am Ava, and if you're watching this, you probably think my story is about money. But it's not. It's about the cost of silence, the price of dignity, and the incredible work it takes to teach an entire family that respect is non-negotiable. The moment is forever burned into my memory. A table set for 28 guests at my mother-in-law, Genevieve's Palm Beach estate. The air thick with the aroma of prime rib, and the servers trained in choreographed, silent perfection, placing sizzling steaks before everyone except me. My plate remained utterly, glaringly empty, a porcelain spotlight focused entirely on my exclusion. When my aunt, Phoebe, finally broke the agonizing silence and asked why I had been skipped, Genevieve or Jen as she preferred when being devastatingly casual, just gave that tight, thin smile of hers and delivered the line that still echoes in my darkest moments. I only ordered for family, dear. The sheer audacity of it, delivered with that sweet, cultured venom, was breathtaking. I had been married to her son for 3 years. But my story, my genuine, messy, hard-fought story, begins long before that steakless dinner. It starts with a classic American dream, built not on inherited wealth, but on sheer grinding effort. I grew up middle class in Fishtown, Philadelphia. My dad drove a delivery truck for 25 years, clocking in before dawn, and my mom worked as a secretary at the local elementary school. They were the kind of parents who didn't talk about legacy. They talked about opportunities. They sacrificed every single vacation and delayed every personal upgrade to send me to college. That diploma wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a flag planted on the high ground. I was the first in our family to earn a degree and later a master's in speech-language pathology. I worked 2 jobs through grad school, took out loans that felt like mortgages, and eventually built a thriving private practice in University City, Philadelphia, helping kids find their voices and their confidence. My life wasn't about glamour. I drove a reliable sedan, lived in a functional condo, and my friends were the kind who celebrated my achievements over cheap takeout. It was a life authentically mine, built on merit. Then there was Liam. We met 3 years ago at a wedding in Charleston, South Carolina. He was the best man. I was a college friend of the bride. It was that cliché movie scene moment. We locked eyes across the crowded reception hall, and the rest of the room just dissolved. He was impeccably handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, but it was his kind eyes and easy, unforced laugh that snagged me. When he asked me to dance, the connection was instant, deep, intelligent, and immediate. We talked until the venue staff were stacking chairs around us. Liam was a financial analyst, the golden boy destined to take over his father Arthur's successful investment firm, Sterling Group, based on Wall Street, New York City. His father was respected, measured, a man whose silence commanded attention. His mother, Genevieve, was the embodiment of what I had only seen in glossy magazines. Old Florida money, private schools, Ivy League. Our worlds were galaxies apart. I was fueled by ambition. He was cushioned by legacy. Yet Liam was grounded, intelligent, and ambitious in his own right. Our romance was a glorious, breathtaking whirlwind that ignored the chasm of our backgrounds. For months later, he proposed on a secluded stretch of beach in the Hamptons, and I said yes without hesitation. That right there was my first mistake. I fundamentally underestimated how deeply class divisions run in some circles, especially when that circle is ruled by Genevieve Harrington. My first encounter with his parents, at an engagement dinner in a private room overlooking Central Park, felt less like a celebration and more like a corporate interview. Arthur was polite but distant, seemingly more interested in market trends than my personal story. Genevieve, however, was another matter. She was draped in effortless designer silk that probably cost more than my annual student loan payments. Her smile was a mask, a polite veneer that never, not once, reached those sharp, assessing eyes as they took inventory of me. The questions came quickly, but always wrapped in a pleasant tone. Where exactly did you grow up, Ava? And what does your father do again? A delivery truck, how quaint. And your master's, was that from a state school? Every answer I gave seemed to disappoint her further, but the real emotional gut punch was when she pulled out her phone. You know, Kendall and Liam made such a handsome couple at the Prescott Charity Gala, she reminisced, showing me a photo of a stunning woman in a ball gown. Her father is a major hospital director, and her family has that gorgeous place on Nantucket. Such a shame things didn't work out. Her mother and I were on the committee together, of course. The dig was anything but subtle. It was a clear warning shot. Liam, however, was completely oblivious. He adored his mother and couldn't see past her polished facade. When I brought up her behavior later, gently mentioning the Kendall comments, he would defend her with the same tired lines. Mom is just protective, babe. She wants to make sure I'm happy. Give her time. She'll warm up to you. I clung to that hope, believing that love, our undeniable connection, would be enough to bridge the gap. In hindsight, I should have realized then that Genevieve Harrington didn't need time. She needed a challenger, and I hadn't yet realized I was in the ring. Time, unfortunately, only seemed to sharpen her weapons. Time, as Liam had promised, did not make things better. It only allowed Genevieve to refine her subtle but systematic campaign of exclusion. The wedding itself was a logistical miracle orchestrated by Liam and a team of planners, effectively keeping Genevieve's micromanagement focused on floral arrangements rather than guest lists. But once the honeymoon glow faded and the reality of weekly Sunday lunches in Palm Beach set in, the dynamic solidified. I was Liam's wife, but I was not family. The hostility wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, polished, and inflicted by 1,000 paper cuts. Liam's sister, Brooke, a woman who seemed permanently locked in a state of mild, competitive dissatisfaction, initially tried to be friendly. She'd compliment my earrings one moment, only to immediately pivot and mention her own recent achievement, winning an exclusive literary prize or securing a top spot on a charity board. The next, there was an underlying pressure to every interaction, a constant testing of my social etiquette. I was always being subtly corrected on which fork to use or which wine to praise. Liam's brother, Ethan, and his wife, Chloe, were cordial but maintained a polite, almost wary distance. They seemed to follow Genevieve's lead, keeping me firmly at arm's length. I learned later that Chloe had endured a similar, though less intense, trial period when she first married Ethan, but she had eventually won Genevieve's approval by going to work at Arthur's firm and fully assimilating into the family's expectations. Her path was one of submission. Mine was clearly meant to be a struggle. I tried everything to win Genevieve's approval, convinced that if I just showed enough effort, enough value, she would see me as worthy. I spent hours researching her preferred charities, learning about her favorite artists, and purchasing thoughtful, high-quality gifts. For her birthday, I gave her a stunning crystal vase from a prestigious New England glassblower, a piece that cost me 3 months of meticulous savings. It disappeared immediately. When I asked about it a month later, she smiled vaguely. Oh, that piece? I'm afraid it didn't quite match the aesthetic in the living room. It's still in the box, dear. Thank you so much, though. My offer to help with her annual, extremely exclusive charity auction was dismissed with a polite wave of her hand. The committee is already set, Ava. It's an established system. Maybe next year. Next year never came. The only bright spot, the single lifeline in this increasingly suffocating environment, was my Aunt Phoebe, my mother's sister. She lived relatively close in Broward County, Florida, and was often invited to larger family functions, although always much to Genevieve's visible annoyance. Phoebe was my anchor. She was the one who could witness the dynamics firsthand and provide the perspective I desperately needed when I felt like I was drowning in Genevieve's subtle hostility. She had a wry sense of humor and a steel spine, and she didn't mince words. "She's trying to ice you out, sweetie," Phoebe told me once over coffee. "It's a power play. She needs to feel like the gatekeeper of the Harrington dynasty, and you, the self-made woman, are a threat to that narrative." Then came the embossed invitation for Arthur's retirement celebration, the dinner that would change everything. It specified black tie attire and promised a 5-course meal prepared by a renowned chef. I approached it with a toxic mixture of dread and a desperate, residual hope. Phoebe was also invited, an unusual occurrence that gave me a sliver of comfort. I later discovered, through an accidental slip by Arthur, that he and Phoebe had been serious college sweethearts, a fact Genevieve knew but tolerated only because of Arthur's rare insistence. The history there was fascinating, though I hadn't yet fully grasped the emotional depth of that connection. "This is an important night, Ava," Liam stressed, smoothing his tuxedo as we prepared. "Dad is finally stepping back from the firm, and Mom has been planning this dinner for months. The entire extended family and every partner from the firm will be there. We need everything to go perfectly." I nodded, selecting a conservative, deep blue gown I'd saved meticulously for, hoping its elegance would meet Genevieve's impossible standards. I promised myself I would do everything right. I would be silent, poised, and utterly impeccable. If only I had known that the night was destined for explosion, and that perfection was never what Genevieve Harrington truly wanted. The evening of Arthur's retirement celebration arrived, cold and crisp with the kind of perfect October chill that only high-end Florida landscaping could perfectly frame. Liam and I pulled up to the Harrington Colonial Mansion, a structure that looked less like a home and more like a carefully curated museum, in a line of luxury vehicles. The house was a masterpiece of tasteful wealth, illuminated by soft landscape lighting that highlighted every manicured shrub and stone facade. "You look beautiful, really," Liam whispered, squeezing my hand as we walked toward the imposing front door. I had spent a fortune on the dress, a sleek, tailored gown and hours on professional styling, determined not to give Genevieve any ammunition. Genevieve, however, was clearly ready for battle. She greeted us at the door herself, bypassing the hired staff who were bustling around taking coats. She enveloped Liam in a warm, effusive hug, exclaiming loudly about how handsome he looked. When she turned to me, the smile instantly evaporated, replaced by a cool, assessing glance. She offered a brief air kiss near my cheek, carefully ensuring zero actual contact. "Ava, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with implied surprise that someone of my background could manage to adhere to the dress code. She offered zero comment on my appearance before pivoting seamlessly to welcome the next wave of guests. It was a calculated microaggression, and the night had barely begun. The grand foyer opened into a series of exquisitely decorated rooms, already filled with about 60 people in formal attire. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, intimidating glow. A string quartet played Bach softly in the main salon, where uniformed staff circulated with trays of expensive champagne and hors d'oeuvres. As Liam led me through the rooms, introducing me to distant cousins and senior partners, I felt increasingly like a supporting character in someone else's lavish play. I noticed the family photographs arranged everywhere, professional portraits of the Harrington children, candid shots from exotic family vacations. I searched, my stomach tightening with a familiar dread, but found not a single photograph from my wedding to Liam, despite seeing recent, prominently placed pictures of Ethan and Brooke with their spouses. "Liam, come here, son." Arthur's voice was deep, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Liam apologized quickly, gave my hand another absent squeeze, and headed off to join his father and a group of older, powerful-looking men. Left on my own, I wandered toward the dining room, peering through the doorway at the breathtaking table setting. The long, antique mahogany table was set for precisely 28, laid out with fine bone china, Waterford crystal stemware, and heavy silver flatware arranged with the mathematical precision of a high-stakes military operation. Elegant calligraphy name cards marked each place setting, a detail that now filled me with a strange sense of foreboding. Quite the production, isn't it? The voice was familiar, wry, and deeply comforting. I turned to find Phoebe, my aunt, looking stunningly elegant in a deep emerald dress, her silver hair styled in her sharp signature bob. "Phoebe!" I embraced her, genuinely relieved to see a friendly face. "I didn't know you were coming." "Arthur and I go way back," she said with a knowing wink. "College friends. Jen knows, of course, but conveniently forgets whenever possible. Arthur made sure I was included tonight." As we chatted, a server approached with a tray of champagne flutes. He offered one to Phoebe, but then, without even glancing in my direction, began to move past. I had to physically reach out and ask, "Excuse me, may I have one as well, please?" The server paused, looked momentarily confused, and then allowed me to take a glass. I caught Genevieve watching the interaction from across the room, her lips pressed into a thin, triumphant line. "Don't let her get to you," Phoebe murmured, following my gaze. "That's exactly what she wants." Throughout the next hour, the pattern of exclusion was like a slow drip torture. Servers consistently overlooked me when offering canapés. Later, when Brooke showed off a new, massive diamond bracelet from her husband, Genevieve remarked loudly that it was precisely the kind of quality piece that only comes from good breeding and innate taste, pointedly glancing at my modest jewelry. The most aggressive slight came when Genevieve herself circulated, personally refilling wine glasses. She topped off everyone's drink, exchanging brief, warm words with each guest. When she reached Phoebe and me, she refilled Phoebe's glass and asked about her recent trip to Europe. Then, without a word, she turned to move away. As she did, her elbow accidentally bumped my arm, sending a splash of deep red Merlot wine staining my blue gown. "Oh, dear," Genevieve sighed, devoid of real concern. "You should hurry down the hall to the powder room, second door on the left, and try to take care of that." The message was clear. I was stained, and I needed to remove myself from sight. Fighting back a burning wave of tears, I retreated to the opulent powder room. I dabbed frantically at the dark, spreading stain on my dress with a damp towel, knowing it was futile. It wasn't just the stain, it was the cumulative humiliation. As I stood there, I noticed a vent high up on the wall, and through it I could hear muffled voices from the adjacent room. I realized with a sickening lurch that it was Genevieve's private study, likely where the family was now gathering away from the main party. I froze, the damp towel pressed against my chest. "She's trying so hard, though," I heard Brooke's voice say, a hint of suppressed laughter in her tone. "It's actually painful to watch. That dress is clearly off the rack, And those shoes with that handbag, it's just wrong. Exactly, Genevieve's voice replied, sharp and definitive. Liam needs to guide her. Kendall always understood these events intuitively. The Prescott Gala photo says it all. Then came the line that stopped my heart cold. For now, Genevieve mused. Kendall called last week, you know. Still single, still running her family's foundation. I've always thought those two would find their way back to each other eventually. It's just a matter of time and patience. The air went out of my lungs. Liam had dated Kendall for 3 years before me, but he had told me they broke up because they wanted different things. I had no idea they were still in contact, much less that Genevieve was actively keeping the lines of communication not just open, but well-greased. My husband's mother was actively sabotaging my marriage, and she was doing it with casual, confident ease. I pressed the cold, damp towel harder against my face, trying to absorb the truth. This wasn't about me trying harder. This was about her wanting me gone. When I finally returned to the main party, my composure was fragile but intact, my gown still bearing the telltale stain. Liam was, naturally, deep in conversation with Arthur and a senior firm partner about the succession plan. He barely registered my return, nodding absently when I touched his arm. The strain of maintaining a pleasant expression while knowing the full depth of the hostility aimed at me was exhausting. I felt a nervous energy thrumming beneath my skin, a realization that something had to give. I couldn't keep pretending. Finally, Genevieve clapped her hands softly, a signal that immediately commanded attention. Dinner will be served, everyone. Please follow the staff to the dining room. Guests began moving toward the long mahogany table, searching for their assigned seats. My anxiety, which had been simmering all evening, spiked. I checked each elegantly written name card. Ethan, Chloe, Brooke, Charles, but could not find one with my name, Ava, anywhere along the table. Liam, I whispered, touching his arm, my voice tight. I don't see my place card. He looked down, annoyed at the interruption, then shrugged dismissively. Oh, that's just an oversight, babe. Don't make a fuss. Here, you can sit between me and Phoebe. He casually pulled up an additional, folding chair, disrupting the careful, mathematical spacing of the place settings. This chair, of course, was bare. No charger plate, no fine china, no crystal glasses, none of the elaborate setting every other guest enjoyed. Genevieve immediately noticed the glaring anomaly. Liam, we had the seating arranged very specifically, she said, her voice tight with controlled displeasure. It's fine, Mom, he replied, already sitting down. Ava can sit right here. As everyone settled into their seats, I felt Genevieve's cold, disapproving glances every time I dared to speak. When I answered Arthur's polite, generalized question about my work with a brief, honest story about a young client's breakthrough in speech, Genevieve interrupted instantly. Chloe, dear, she cut in smoothly, addressing Ethan's wife, tell us all about your recent European vacation. That cruise ship sounds divine. I was cut off mid-sentence, the story dying awkwardly on my lips. The tension in the room was now palpable, radiating out from the head of the table. But I had no idea that things were about to escalate from subtle insult to overt, breathtaking cruelty. The dining room was a hushed, golden spectacle, illuminated by dozens of flickering candles and the grand crystal chandelier. The fine china and silver gleamed against the dark wood. It was the epitome of sophisticated elegance, which only served to amplify the contrast of my increasingly precarious position. Phoebe, seated on my other side, squeezed my hand tightly beneath the table, her silent support a small anchor. Once everyone was settled, the servers appeared from the kitchen with choreographed precision. The head server announced the first course, a delicate lobster bisque with truffle oil. White porcelain bowls were placed before each guest, one after the other. Each guest, that is, except me. I sat there, my bare folding chair, an empty space, a physical manifestation of my exclusion. Liam, deeply engaged in a conversation with Ethan about quarterly projections for Sterling Group, didn't notice immediately. Phoebe, however, did. "Excuse me," Phoebe said, her voice carrying a quiet but undeniable authority, addressing a passing server. My niece did not receive the first course. The server, looking terrified, glanced toward Genevieve, who smiled placidly from the head of the table. "I believe we are one setting short," Genevieve stated, her voice honey-sweet. "The chef prepared exactly enough for the invited guests, Phoebe. Perhaps you could share with Liam, Ava." The implication was a heavy, public hammer blow. I had not been included in the original guest count because I was not truly invited. I was merely tolerated as Liam's plus one. Liam finally paused his conversation, noticing the empty space before me, and frowned slightly. "Mom, could the kitchen prepare another portion? The bisque is quite complex, dear. It was prepared in exact quantities. I am sure Ava understands." Her tone suggested that making an issue of it would be terribly unsophisticated, a truly low-class move. Liam hesitated, then pushed his bowl slightly toward me. "We can share," he muttered quickly, before plunging back into his conversation with Ethan. I took one small, bitter spoonful of the bisque, my appetite shrinking with every passing moment. The second course arrived, a small plate of perfectly seared scallops with a rich beurre blanc sauce. The pattern repeated itself flawlessly. Everyone received a serving except me. This time, I didn't bother to point it out. And this time neither did Liam. He absently offered me one of his scallops while discussing the merits of European versus American business schools with his cousin. By the third course, a palate-cleansing sorbet, I noticed several guests casting uncomfortable, side-eye glances in my direction. Arthur, his silver hair immaculate, appeared genuinely confused, but he said nothing, deferring silently to his wife's management of the event, as he had likely done for decades. Then came the main course. Servers entered carrying enormous silver trays bearing sizzling, perfectly cooked cuts of Japanese prime ribeye steak, accompanied by roasted asparagus and truffle mashed potatoes. The intoxicating aroma filled the room, and appreciative murmurs rippled around the table. A server placed plates before each person until he reached my empty spot. But instead of the massive, premium steak everyone else received, he set down a small, utterly plain garden salad. It had no protein, no garnish, no vegetables other than lettuce and a few slices of tomato, and conspicuously no dressing. The contrast between my sparse, miserable plate and the elaborate, premium meals surrounding me was a physical, visual insult. It was no longer subtle. It was a deliberate, public execution of my dignity. Phoebe, her face pale with fury, set down her fork with a sharp, echoing clink against her plate. "Genevieve," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "why does Ava have a salad when everyone else has steak?" The entire table fell silent. Conversation ceased as every eye in the room pivoted to our end of the table, waiting for Genevieve's reply. Her smile remained fixed, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian hardness. "I only ordered for family," she repeated, her voice deceptively sweet, but laced with undisguised venom. The steaks were quite expensive, flown in from Japan. I'm sure Ava appreciates something lighter anyway. The silence that followed was deafening, crushing the room. The silence stretched, agonizing and eternal. 27 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for my response. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. Beside me, Liam, my husband, the man who supposedly loved me, continued cutting his premium Japanese ribeye, his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. He avoided looking at me or at the dismal, undressed salad before me. Am I family or not, Liam? I asked him quietly, the words barely a whisper. Liam glanced up, his expression pained, not by my humiliation, but by the social crisis I was creating. Don't do this, Ava. Not here, he muttered, still chewing a piece of the perfectly marbled beef. That was the exact moment something inside me shattered. 3 years of calculated psychological warfare, the subtle exclusions, the comparisons to Kendall, the forced apologies, the lonely effort, all crashed down on me at once. I had endured Genevieve's passive-aggressive cruelty for Liam's sake, always believing that my perseverance would eventually win her acceptance. But sitting there with that pathetic plain salad, watching my husband prioritize his mother's fragile peace and his expensive meal over my basic human dignity, I realized a terrifying, liberating truth. Nothing would ever change unless I, Ava, forced it to change. The final insult arrived when the staff brought out dessert, elaborate individual chocolate soufflés rising majestically from their ramekins. Once again, the server approached me, paused and passed by, leaving an empty space where my dessert should have been. Not even a mint, not a cookie, just the void. I watched as everyone at the table savored their soufflés, making appreciative noises and complimenting Genevieve on the menu. Liam was so absorbed in his dessert that he didn't offer a single bite, didn't even seem to notice that I sat beside him with absolutely nothing. My hands trembled slightly in my lap as I gathered what little courage I had left. Phoebe, sensing my internal storm, squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support that gave me the final, necessary push. I had spent 3 years shrinking myself, accepting disrespect, and pretending not to notice the 1,000 paper cuts to my dignity. I looked around at the Harringtons, laughing and enjoying their magnificent meal while I sat publicly excluded, and I knew this was the defining moment of my marriage. I could choose to stay silent and accept my place as an outsider forever, or I could stand up for myself, whatever the consequences. I set my pristine napkin deliberately beside my empty plate. Actually, I said, my voice shockingly steady despite the violent thumping of my heart, I would like to address something. The conversations around the table, previously a comfortable roar, gradually quieted. They realized I wasn't making a quiet comment to Liam. I was speaking to the entire room. Liam tensed beside me, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Ava, he hissed, his eyes wide with panic. Not now. But I continued, my gaze locked directly onto Genevieve at the head of the table. For 3 years, I have tried, truly tried, to be a part of this family, I stated clearly. I have overlooked the slights, excused the accidental exclusions, and accepted being treated as less than. But tonight has made something very clear that I can no longer ignore. Genevieve's fixed smile wavered, and her knuckles whitened as she gripped her dessert spoon. I am not sure what you mean, dear, she began, her voice brittle. This is hardly the time for whatever grievance you have invented. Invented, I repeated, maintaining my composure with the focus of a surgeon. Let me be specific, then. Tonight, I was the only person not given a place card. I was the only one servers consistently overlooked for drinks and appetizers. I received a plain salad while everyone else enjoyed Japanese prime ribeye, and now no dessert. I swept my gaze around the table, meeting the eyes of the family. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others appeared genuinely shocked, as if they hadn't noticed the pattern until I pointed it out directly. But this isn't just about tonight, I pressed on, my voice rising slightly with conviction. It is about the Christmas gift exchange where everyone received a present except me because I wasn't on the family list. It is about the family vacation photos where I was asked to step aside so you could get just the family. And it is about my wedding picture being the only one conspicuously absent from your family photo wall. Arthur, the usually reserved patriarch, frowned, looking genuinely confused and deeply uncomfortable. Genevieve, is this true? Before Genevieve could launch her defense, Phoebe spoke up, her voice firm and clear. It is all true, Arthur. I have witnessed it myself numerous times, and frankly, it's disgraceful. This is ridiculous. Genevieve hissed, her control finally slipping. Ava has always been overly sensitive. We have done nothing but welcome her into our home. Welcome me, I echoed, disbelief flooding my voice. You have systematically excluded me from day one. You dismiss my career, my background, everything about me, and you compare me unfavorably to Kendall at every opportunity. I think the only thing you've welcomed is the chance to wound me. Liam finally found his voice, not in my defense, but in his mother's. Ava, you are embarrassing yourself and my family. This is my father's retirement dinner, for God's sake. His words stung worse than any of Genevieve's slights. Your family, I repeated, the full weight of the term crashing down. After 3 years of marriage, I am still not part of your family in your mind. That is not what I meant. Liam backpedaled frantically, looking around at the horrified faces of his relatives. Isn't it? I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to a screenshot I had saved 4 weeks earlier. 4 weeks ago, you and your mother exchanged texts about me. Would you like me to read them to everyone? Liam's face drained of all color. You went through my phone. I didn't have to, I countered. You left it open on the nightstand when you went to shower. The notification from Mom caught my eye, and I quote, Ava looked completely out of place at the club fundraiser. Could you not have at least helped her select appropriate attire? Kendall always understood these events. And you, Liam, replied, I know, Mom. Sometimes I wonder if she will ever fit in with us. Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Brooke looked down at her plate. Ethan and Chloe exchanged stunned glances. You never defended me, I said to Liam, my voice finally cracking with the depth of the betrayal. Not once in 3 years have you stood up to your mother when she belittled me. How dare you? Genevieve shrieked, her perfectly maintained poise dissolving into raw fury. Liam gave you a life you never could have achieved on your own. A nobody from a nothing family, and this is your gratitude. Arthur finally rose, his napkin falling to the floor with a soft thud. Genevieve, that is enough. No, Arthur, it is not enough. Genevieve continued, her carefully constructed image crumbling entirely. She has never been good enough for our son, and everyone in this room knows it. I have merely been the only one with the courage to acknowledge it. Liam looked genuinely torn, his eyes darting between his enraged mother and his broken wife. Mom, please stop. Choose, Liam. Genevieve demanded, her voice shrill, a true ultimatum ringing across the silent room. Right now. your family, or her. The silence that followed her demand was absolute. 27 pairs of eyes moved to Liam, waiting for his response. I held my breath, a tiny, irrational part of me still hoping that he would finally choose me, his wife. Liam swallowed hard, looking at his mother, then at me, then down at his half-eaten dessert. He remained silent. His silence was the answer. I stood up slowly, deliberately placing my napkin beside my empty plate. "Thank you for making this so clear, both of you," I said, looking from Liam to Genevieve. "I will not stay where I am not wanted or respected." Dignity was all I had left, and I clung to it as I turned and walked out of the dining room. No one called after me. No one followed, not even Liam. I collected my coat from the confused staff member in the foyer, my legs stiff but carrying me with a determined stride. I stepped out of the mansion and into the cool October night. The cold air hit my face, and the dam of tears I had been holding back threatened to burst. I refused to cry on Genevieve Harrington's property. I reached my car, fumbling blindly with the keys in the circular driveway, before I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Ava, wait." It wasn't Liam. It was Phoebe. "I need to go. Phoebe, please." I choked out, my hand shaking so badly I could barely insert the key into the ignition. "I know, sweetheart, I know, but you shouldn't drive upset. You're shaking. Let me take you home, or at least drive behind you." "I can manage," I insisted, opening the car door. "Then I will follow you to make sure you get there safely," Phoebe said firmly, her face set with a fierce loyalty that warmed me more than any fire. "And Ava," she added, placing a hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of pride, "what you did in there? That took tremendous courage. You stood up for yourself in front of the entire jury. Never regret that." As I pulled my car out of the driveway and onto the quiet, tree-lined street, I glanced into my rearview mirror. Phoebe's headlights were steady behind me, a bright point of support in the darkness. But there was no sign of Liam's luxury sedan pulling out. No sign that my husband had chosen to follow his wife instead of remaining with his mother and his inheritance. That told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties truly lay. We arrived at our upscale apartment building in Boca Raton, Florida. The doorman, totally unaware that my world had just imploded, greeted me with his usual friendly smile. In the elevator, I leaned against the cold wall, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining out of me. "Do you want me to come up?" Phoebe asked gently. I shook my head. "I need a moment to be alone, Phoebe. But thank you for everything tonight. Call me anytime, day or night." "Don't hesitate," she insisted, pulling me into a tight, comforting hug before the doors opened to my floor. Inside our apartment, the silence was deafening. It was a beautiful apartment, furnished with the elegant, restrained taste that Liam favored, but every picture of us from happier times, our honeymoon, our quick getaway weekends, seemed to mock me from the walls. Our wedding portrait, the one Genevieve had never displayed, held center place above our fireplace. We looked so young, so happy, so hopeful. That couple felt like strangers now. Only when the door was locked behind me did I finally let the tears come. I sank to the floor, my back against the locked door, and sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. All the hurt, humiliation, and the crushing weight of betrayal poured out of me in waves that left me gasping for air. My phone started buzzing relentlessly, calls from Liam, which I let go straight to voicemail. When I finally found the strength to listen to his messages, there was no apology, no concern for me, only anger and a staggering self-pity. How could you embarrass my family like that? On tonight of all nights, my father's retirement dinner. Ava, you need to call my mother and apologize immediately. The sheer, monumental unfairness of his demand unleashed a fresh wave of tears. In what universe was I the one who owed an apology? Around midnight, I heard Liam's key in the lock. I had moved from the floor to the bedroom by then, sitting on the edge of our massive king bed with a suitcase half-packed beside me. "What are you doing?" he demanded, seeing the open suitcase. "Packing," I said simply, my voice sounding hollow and detached. "I'm going to stay with Phoebe for a while." "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed, throwing his tuxedo jacket onto the chaise lounge. "Running away will not solve anything. This is a fixable fight. I'm not running away. I am removing myself from a situation where I am not respected or valued." Liam paced the room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair in frustration. "You humiliated my mother in front of our entire family, Ava. What did you expect me to do?" "What did I expect?" I repeated, standing up, the shock turning into white-hot fury. "I expected my husband to defend me when his mother deliberately excluded and insulted me. I expected to be treated with basic human decency at a family dinner. How can you possibly defend that? My mother is particular about her events." "You know that," he argued. "Particular? Liam, she served me a plain salad while everyone else got premium steak. She didn't give me dessert. How can you possibly minimize that cruelty?" "You are exaggerating as usual," he dismissed, his defense mechanism instantly clicking into place. "If you had just quietly spoken to me after dinner instead of making a scene. Like all the other times, I have quietly spoken to you about your mother's behavior." I cut him off. When has that ever changed anything? Never. All it did was allow her to escalate the abuse. Liam sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the sight of his pain momentarily softening my anger. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. My father is retiring. The firm is transitioning. My mother has always done things a certain way. A certain way that deliberately excludes and humiliates your wife," I finished flatly. "She's having a hard time adjusting to changes in the family. If you would just try harder to fit in." Something in me snapped completely at those words. Try harder. I have done nothing but try for 3 years, Liam. I changed how I dress, how I speak, what I talk about. I have attended every function, joined committees, donated to charities I cannot afford. What more could I possibly do? You could start by apologizing to my mother. I zipped the suitcase closed with a decisive final sound. I will not apologize for finally standing up for myself. As I moved toward the door, Liam blocked my path. "If you leave now, you are choosing this conflict over our marriage." "No, Liam," I said, looking him straight in the eye, devoid of tears now. "You already made that choice when you sat silently while your mother treated me like garbage. When you texted her, agreeing that I didn't fit in. When you demanded I apologize instead of acknowledging how deeply I have been hurt. I pushed past him with my suitcase, but his next words stopped me cold. "She warned me, you know," he said, his voice hard, echoing Genevieve's cruelty. "My mother said you would never truly fit into our world, that eventually you would show your true colors." I turned to face him one last time, my mind suddenly connecting the dots from years ago. "And she warned me, too, in her own way. She told me at our engagement dinner that your relationship with Kendall ended because she didn't support your career enough. But that was a lie, wasn't it?" It ended because Kendall finally got tired of your mother's treatment and your failure to stand up to her. Liam's shocked expression confirmed my suspicion. How did you know about that? He stammered. I didn't until just now, I said quietly, the confirmation hitting me like a physical blow. But it makes perfect sense. Has your mother been in contact with Kendall recently? Perhaps invited her to lunch? His silence was damning. That's what I thought. I looked at the man who was supposed to be my partner and saw only a cowardly, entitled stranger. Goodbye, Liam. I spent the next 5 days on Phoebe's custom-made velvet sectional couch, alternating between tearful exhaustion and a cold, protective numbness. Phoebe was a quiet, steady presence, bringing me coffee, making sure I ate, and only speaking when I asked a direct question. What happens now? She finally asked gently on the 5th morning. I don't know, Phoebe, I admitted, staring into my mug. Part of me wants to fight for the marriage, the man I thought I married. But a much larger part is wondering if there is anything left worth fighting for. The betrayal from Liam was worse than Genevieve's cruelty. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of minimal contact with Liam. He called and texted constantly, his messages swinging wildly between demands that I return home and vague, non-committal apologies that never quite acknowledged the actual issue, his enabling behavior. I told him I needed space to think, a boundary he constantly tested. Then came the unexpected allies, the first crack in the seemingly impenetrable Harrington facade. Ethan, Liam's elder brother, called me privately, something he had never done before. His voice was awkward, formal, but sincere. Ava, I want you to know that Chloe and I support you, he said. What happened at that dinner was unequivocally wrong. Mom has always been difficult, but this was beyond anything acceptable. I'm truly sorry we didn't speak up sooner. Later that day, Chloe, Ethan's wife, texted me. It was a long, emotional message. When I first married Ethan, Genevieve treated me similarly. Not as extreme as the salad incident, but the same pattern of exclusion and subtle undermining. It took years and my joining Arthur's firm before she accepted me. I just wanted you to know you are absolutely not alone or crazy. What she did was cruel and abusive. Don't go back until he fixes his priorities. Reading her words, knowing that another woman who had survived Genevieve's gauntlet validated my experience, was profoundly healing. But the most shocking interaction came 2 days later when Brooke, Liam's sister, showed up at Phoebe's apartment unannounced. She looked pale and genuinely remorseful, something I had never seen on her competitive, guarded face. I should have said something that night, she admitted, sipping the tea Phoebe had quietly made her. I've watched Mom treat you poorly for 3 years, and I kept silent. I was afraid of becoming her next target, the one she would focus her energy on. It was cowardly of me, and I'm sorry. Has she always been like this, Brooke? I asked, finally understanding the system. Brooke nodded slowly. With anyone she perceives as a threat to her control over the family, yes. It started subtly after she married Dad, but it got worse as we got older. Dad enabled it for decades by simply retreating. Ethan and I learned to navigate it by staying busy and keeping our distance. Liam was always her favorite, her golden boy, so he never had to fight her. He was raised to believe she can do no wrong. This conversation explained Liam's paralysis perfectly. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a product of a lifetime of conditioning. The most awkward, yet strangely pivotal, interaction came when Arthur, the firm's patriarch, called me directly. Ava, this is Arthur, he said, his voice formal, but carrying a weight of self-reflection. I want to apologize for what happened in our home. I had no idea the extent of Well, I should have been more observant, more involved. I am ashamed of my silence. Thank you, Arthur, I said, genuinely surprised by his directness. Genevieve and I are discussing the situation, he continued, emphasizing Genevieve and I. I want you to know that I consider you family, regardless of how poorly that was demonstrated by us both. I will not stand by and watch this happen again. While these unexpected allies provided vital emotional support, Liam's behavior grew more concerning. He swung erratically between genuine contrition and angry self-defense, never fully acknowledging the fundamental problem: his mother's toxicity and his inability to set boundaries. For weeks after the infamous dinner, he delivered an ultimatum of his own via text. Either you come home and make peace with my mother, or we need to rethink our marriage. I can't live like this. That same afternoon, I received a certified letter. It was from a lawyer representing Genevieve Harrington, claiming I had borrowed and failed to return several items of valuable family jewelry from their home. It was a blatant, transparent lie, a clear, desperate attempt at intimidation and establishing a legal position against me. It shocked me back to reality. This was no longer just a family fight. It was war. That evening, I called Lauren, a colleague who had become a close friend and confidant. She listened to the whole story, from the salad to the lawyer's letter. Ava, what you are describing is a textbook toxic family system, she concluded calmly. Liam is deeply enmeshed with his mother. He may love you, but he has been conditioned his entire life to prioritize her approval above all else. This letter proves she's willing to play dirty. So what do I do? First, document everything. Every text, email, that lawyer's letter. And second, you need to consult with a divorce attorney, even if just to understand your options. You need to protect yourself legally and emotionally. The word divorce hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, I had not allowed myself to think that far ahead. But Lauren was right. I needed knowledge to gain power. 2 days later, I had a consultation with a family law attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I made no decision, but I left feeling armored. That evening, my phone rang. It was Liam. I almost sent it to voicemail, but decided to answer. Can we meet? He asked, his voice subdued, defeated. Just to talk. Neutral ground. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed. The coffee shop near Phoebe's apartment. Tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. I'll be there, he promised. I hung up, wondering if this meeting would provide the brutal closure I needed, or a new beginning I couldn't yet believe was possible. Either way, I knew one thing. I was no longer the same woman who had sat silently accepting disrespect at Genevieve's table. That Ava was gone forever. The coffee shop was buzzing with the Saturday morning rush when I arrived 5 minutes early. I chose a quiet corner table, partially screened by a large potted ficus, which offered a measure of privacy without complete isolation. My hands cradled a ceramic mug of black coffee, untouched. My stomach was too knotted with anxiety to accommodate the caffeine. When Liam walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. In just 4 weeks, he seemed to have aged years. His usually impeccable appearance was slightly rumpled, the tailored shirt slightly less crisp, his hair less perfectly styled, and dark circles were prominent under his eyes. He looked, for the first time, truly broken. He spotted me immediately and made his way over, carrying his own latte. "Thank you for meeting me, Ava," he said, his tone formal, as if we were business associates rather than husband and wife teetering on the edge of collapse. "You wanted to talk," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. "So talk." Liam took a deep, shuddering breath. seeming to gather his thoughts. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks, and I realize I owe you an apology. I raised an eyebrow, not softening my gaze. An apology? For what exactly? The way things happened at the dinner was inappropriate. Inappropriate, I repeated, leaning forward slightly. Is that really the word you want to use for what happened, Liam? Because it sounds like you are still minimizing it. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ava, I am trying here. Are you? Because inappropriate doesn't cover deliberate humiliation. Your mother deliberately excluded and humiliated me. You let her, and then you demanded I apologize to her. That's not inappropriate, Liam. That's an ultimate act of betrayal. I know, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know how that sounds now. At the time, I was just reacting the way I always have. Mom gets upset. We all scramble to smooth things over, even when she's completely in the wrong. Especially then, he admitted quietly, a flicker of genuine insight crossing his face. It has always been easier to placate her than confront her. It's what I was trained to do. I pulled a thin, organized folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. I brought something I want you to see. What is this? Evidence, he asked, a touch of his old defensiveness returning. Simply put, yes, I said. Open it. Inside were printouts of text exchanges, emails, and photos documenting 3 years of systematic exclusion and undermining by Genevieve, all organized chronologically with dates and brief explanations. Liam flipped through the pages slowly, his expression growing more troubled with each turn. The evidence of my sanity, laid out in cold, hard print. You kept all of this, he murmured, sounding stunned. Not intentionally at first, but after a while I started documenting things because you always dismissed my concerns. I needed to prove to myself I wasn't imagining it. He paused at the screenshot of his own text exchange with Genevieve about me not fitting in. I watched him read his own words, the confirmation of his betrayal, and saw a flicker of self-disgust. I remember this. I was angry that night, frustrated that things were always so tense between you and Mom. I should never have said that. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed. But what hurts more is that you never stood up for me. Not once in all these incidents. You always chose her comfort over my dignity. The waitress approached our table to refill our coffees. Everything okay over here? She asked, sensing the profound tension. Fine, thank you, Liam replied, once again automatically putting on his public face. After she moved away, he leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. Ava, I want to tell you something that happened after you left the dinner. I steeled myself for another excuse. Go ahead. After you walked out, the silence was horrible. Aunt Charlotte immediately started saying you were overreacting, and Mom began crying hysterically about how disrespectful you were. But then Dad stood up and said, Enough, Genevieve. What you did tonight was cruel and deliberate, and I will not pretend otherwise. I blinked in surprise. Arthur had always been so passive in the face of Genevieve's emotional theatrics. He told everyone at the table that he had watched for years as Mom controlled who was in and who was out of the family, and that he had been a coward for allowing it. He said he was ashamed of her behavior and mine. Yours. Liam nodded. He took me aside afterward and said something I can't stop thinking about. He said, I failed to protect your mother from her worst instincts, and now you are failing to protect your wife. Don't make my mistake, son. It leads to a half-lived life. I sat back, processing this unexpected, pivotal development. What did you say to him? Nothing. At first. I was still defending Mom out of habit, but then Dad showed me something else. Liam pulled out his phone and scrolled until he found a photo. This. He handed me the phone. On the screen was a beautiful, slightly grainy photo I had never seen before. A young, stunning Arthur dancing intimately with a young woman at what looked like a college formal. That young woman had Phoebe's signature, silver bob, and fiercely independent eyes. "That's Dad and Phoebe," Liam explained, his voice low. They dated seriously in college. Dad was going to propose, but his parents disapproved. Phoebe came from a middle-class background, worked her way through school. Sound familiar? What happened was that his parents pressured him to break it off and introduced him to Mom, who came from the right kind of family. Dad chose the path of least resistance. He told me he has regretted it his entire life. I handed the phone back, my mind spinning. The weight of family history and the profound, multi-generational nature of Genevieve's control suddenly became clear. "The point is," Liam continued, his voice heavy with emotion, "I saw myself making the exact same mistake, Ava, and the thought of a lifetime of regret, losing you because I was too scared to stand up to my mother, terrified me. So, what are you saying exactly? Words are easy, Liam. What about actions?" "That's why I'm here. I want to go to couples counseling. I want to learn how to be the husband you deserve, the husband I should have been 3 years ago. And I have already told Mom that our relationship cannot continue as it has been." "How did she take that?" I asked, anticipating the fireworks. "Not well," he admitted with a wry, small smile. "Tears, accusations, the works." But I held firm. I told her that if she wants me in her life, she has to respect you and our marriage. And if she can't do that, then we will have limited contact. I'm not willing to lose you, Ava. These 4 weeks apart have been the worst of my life. I wanted to believe him. For the first time, he seemed to truly understand the problem lay with his conditioning and his loyalty, not with me. But there was still one nagging issue. What about Kendall? Liam looked genuinely confused. "What about her?" "Your mother has been meeting with her. Are you in contact with her, too?" "No," he said firmly. "I had no idea Mom was seeing her until you mentioned it that night. I called Kendall afterward to ask about it. Turns out Mom has been trying to orchestrate some accidental meeting between us for months. Kendall only went along with it because Mom told her our marriage was on the rocks. And that's the first time I've spoken to her since we've been together. Kendall and I didn't work for good reasons, and we both moved on. She actually told me to fix things with you because I seemed happier than she had ever seen me when we were together." The waitress returned, this time with a concerned, slightly conspiratorial expression. "Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing a bit. My mother-in-law was the same way. She placed 2 slices of rich chocolate cake on our table, on the house. Sometimes sweet things help bitter conversations." Liam and I both laughed softly, breaking some of the tension. "I'm not saying one conversation fixes everything," Liam said, looking at me seriously. "I know I have a lot to prove to you, but I'm asking for a chance to do that. Will you come to 1 therapy session with me? I've already found someone who specializes in family systems." I considered his request carefully. Despite everything, the love was still there, buried deep beneath the hurt, and for the first time he was committing to real, structural change. 1 session, I agreed cautiously. "We can start with that." The relief on his face was palpable. "Thank you, Ava." 2 days later, we sat in Dr. Chen's office in downtown Boca Raton, an elegantly appointed space with plush, comfortable chairs and soft, non-judgmental lighting. After introductions, she asked us to explain what brought us there. I let Liam go first, wanting to hear how he would frame the situation without my prompting. To my surprise, he was unflinchingly honest. He started with the dinner, describing the salad incident not as an inappropriate oversight, but as a deliberate act of cruelty and exclusion. He detailed his mother's pattern of undermining me and, most critically, his own failure to support me. I grew up believing that keeping Mom happy was everyone's responsibility, he explained, his voice sounding small. Any disruption to her vision of how things should be resulted in emotional consequences for everyone. I learned to anticipate her needs, smooth over problems before they reached her, and never, ever challenge her directly. I never realized how toxic that pattern was until I saw it through Ava's eyes, and even then I resisted acknowledging it because challenging Mom means challenging the entire system I grew up in. Dr. Chin nodded, validating his struggle. That is very common in families with controlling members, Liam. The entire system adapts to accommodate the controller's needs. Your choice to remain silent, while emotionally devastating to Ava, was an effective childhood coping mechanism. The problem is it's destructive in adult relationships. When it was my turn, I described my experience of isolation, the constant message that I was an outsider, and the humiliation of seeing my value dismissed by his mother and tacitly by him. What I struggle with most, I admitted, looking at Liam, is not knowing if Liam and I can move forward when his mother remains such a destructive force in our lives. If I can't trust him to protect me from her, I can't stay. That is a valid concern, Ava, Dr. Chin acknowledged. Liam, your wife has laid out a clear expectation. Are you willing to establish and maintain firm boundaries with your mother to protect your marriage? This is not about being mean to your mother. It is about honoring your commitment to your partner. Yes, he said without hesitation, meeting my eyes. I have already started. The letter my mother sent, the false claim about the jewelry, that was her first aggressive move. I immediately called her attorney and told them to withdraw the letter or I would personally report her for harassment. I then told my mother that if she ever tries to use legal or financial means to intimidate Ava again, I will stop speaking to her entirely. She hasn't responded to the lawyer yet, but the point was made. I was stunned. He hadn't told me about that call. It was a concrete action, a massive step beyond the simple apology. We spent the rest of the session discussing specific boundaries. No unannounced visits. All family events must include a proper invitation and seating for Ava, and no private, negative conversations about our marriage with Genevieve. By the end, I felt cautiously optimistic. Liam seemed genuinely committed to the painful work of changing his conditioned loyalty, and having a neutral third party validate my experiences was profoundly healing. A week later, Liam proposed the next difficult step, a face-to-face meeting with his parents. It needs to be on neutral territory, he insisted, away from Mom's home turf. Let's do it at Dad's office on Wall Street. That's Arthur's territory. I agreed, though the anxiety immediately knotted my stomach as we rode the elevator to the top floor of the Sterling Group building. Arthur greeted us in the reception area. He looked formal, still the powerful man of finance, but there was a genuine warmth and, strangely, an apology in his eyes that I had rarely seen before. "Thank you both for coming," he said softly, leading us to a large, glass-walled conference room where Genevieve waited. She sat rigidly in her chair, perfectly groomed as always, but with a tension in her posture that was unfamiliar. She did not stand when we entered. "Genevieve," Arthur said firmly, his voice low but commanding. We agreed about how this meeting would proceed. With visible, profound reluctance, She slowly rose and extended her hand to me. "Ava," she said, her voice strained, "thank you for coming." It wasn't an apology, but it was a concession, a moment of submission that was unprecedented for her. I shook her hand, feeling the tremors of the impending confrontation. The next hour was one of the most difficult of my life. Liam, looking at his parents, calmly and clearly outlined the necessary changes for us to maintain a relationship with them, particularly with Genevieve. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't get emotional, and that clinical delivery gave his words immense power. From this point forward, Ava will be treated with respect at all times, Liam stated, crossing his arms. She is a full member of this family. Any attempt to exclude her, subtly or overtly, or to undermine our marriage will result in us limiting our contact with you immediately. That is not a threat, Mom. It is simply what needs to happen for my marriage to thrive. This is not open for debate. Genevieve's face cycled through disbelief, anger, hurt, and finally, a cold calculation. "I believe my actions have been misinterpreted," she began, immediately resorting to her usual defense. "Mom," Liam interrupted, holding up a hand. "We are not here to debate whether your behavior was hurtful. It was. The question is whether you can change it going forward. That is the only question that matters." Arthur placed his hand over Genevieve's, a gesture of control and support. "We have discussed this extensively, Genevieve. It is time to make a choice about what kind of relationship you want with our son and daughter-in-law." The term daughter-in-law hung in the air, a reminder of my legitimate place in the family that Genevieve had tried so hard to deny. After a long, brittle silence, Genevieve finally spoke. "I would like to suggest family counseling," she said, her voice flat. "If there have been misunderstandings, perhaps a professional could help us communicate better." It was not an apology, but for Genevieve Harrington, it was a massive, unprecedented concession, a willingness to enter a process that might lead to change. Liam looked at me, leaving the decision entirely in my hands. I thought about all we had been through, the potential for manipulation, but also the possibility of genuine healing. If Arthur was committed and Liam was this firm, there was hope. "I think that could be helpful, Genevieve," I said finally, "but only if everyone commits to the process honestly." As we left the meeting, Liam squeezed my hand. "Thank you for giving this a chance. I know it was not easy." "It's just a beginning," I cautioned. "I know," he agreed, "but it's a beginning I didn't think was possible 4 weeks ago." Walking out of the building into the bright afternoon sun, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. It wasn't certainty, and it wasn't complete trust, but for now it was enough. 8 months passed, bringing changes I could never have imagined on that fateful night when I sat at Genevieve's table with an empty plate. Spring had arrived in Palm Beach, the trees budding with new life that seemed to mirror the slow, messy transformation happening within the Harrington family relationships. Liam had grown in ways that consistently surprised and moved me. The man who once silently allowed his mother to exclude me now stood firmly, unequivocally as my advocate. In our weekly couples therapy sessions with Dr. Chin, he had excavated the deep-seated patterns of his childhood. He finally understood how his need to be the peacekeeper had become the very thing that destroyed his peace. "I was trained from birth to keep Mom happy at all costs," he confessed during one session. Any disruption to her perfect vision resulted in emotional consequences for everyone. I learned to never, ever challenge her directly. Dr. Chin helped him reestablish his primary loyalty. "Your primary loyalty now belongs to your marriage, Liam. That requires a fundamental shift in your priorities, and sometimes it means disappointing your mother. To his immense credit, Liam embraced this difficult work wholeheartedly. He established clear boundaries with Genevieve, no critical comments about Ava, no more unannounced visits, no more pressure about career or children. And most importantly, he maintained them consistently. The family therapy sessions Arthur had suggested actually materialized, though not without significant resistance and manipulation from Genevieve. We met with Dr. Hayes, a therapist specializing in multi-generational family systems, and the sessions were an uncomfortable, messy process of addressing decades of dysfunctional patterns. Genevieve, Dr. Hayes said gently during our third session, your behavior suggests a deep, underlying fear of abandonment. You try to control every family relationship and social narrative because you are desperately afraid of losing your central, vital role. Genevieve visibly bristled, retreating behind her icy composure. That is absurd, Doctor. I simply maintain certain standards for our family. Standards that conveniently exclude anyone you perceive as a threat to your influence, Arthur noted softly, his voice gentle but firm. That was the magic of Arthur. He was finally speaking, and his authority was undeniable. Over time, these brutally difficult conversations began to yield insights. Genevieve, with immense reluctance, began to reveal aspects of her own upbringing. Her mother's conditional love, her father's emotional distance, and the relentless pressure she felt to maintain a perfect social facade at all costs. I was taught that appearances matter above all else, she admitted in our sixth session. I believed people would only value me if I represented something absolutely enviable. If I wasn't perfect, I was nothing. This revelation didn't excuse her behavior toward me, but it helped me understand its tragic origins. The woman who had seemed like an implacable, ice-cold enemy began to appear more human, damaged by her own past in ways that had rippled outwards to affect everyone around her. Our personal lives evolved alongside these therapeutic interventions. Liam and I moved back into our condo in Boca Raton, rebuilding our relationship day by day. We established new traditions, including hosting our own monthly family gatherings in Boca Raton, which became a healing space for the extended family. Ethan and Chloe, now freed from the constraint of Genevieve's approval, shared more openly about their own struggles. Brooke, who had always competed fiercely for her mother's attention, relaxed into more authentic, less performative relationships with everyone, including me. Most surprisingly, Arthur emerged from the shadow of decades of acquiescence to become a more active, communicative husband and father. He began calling me for lunch occasionally, asking thoughtful questions about my speech therapy practice, and sharing stories about his own early career challenges, the things he felt comfortable discussing now that his wife wasn't controlling the conversation. I regret many things, Ava, he told me during one such lunch. But mostly, I regret not being brave enough to challenge the dynamics that hurt people I care about. I can't get those years back, but I can do better now. The relationship between Arthur and Phoebe, too, began to thaw into a genuine, platonic friendship built on shared history and mutual respect, which Genevieve could no longer successfully suppress. Phoebe, my steadfast ally, was our biggest cheerleader. You know, standing up for yourself didn't just change your marriage, she told me once. It changed this entire broken family system. The most tangible evidence of our progress came 3 months after the infamous dinner when Genevieve invited us to their home for Arthur's official birthday celebration. I entered the house with a deep, heavy trepidation, but this time something was profoundly different. Genevieve greeted me with a stiff but sincere welcome. The grand dining table included a proper, beautifully calligraphed place setting for me, and my wedding photo with Liam had appeared, finally, among the family pictures in the living room. It was only a single photo, but it was there. "I helped plan the menu this year," Genevieve said awkwardly as we sat down to dinner. She avoided my eyes, but she spoke the words clearly. "There is salmon as an alternative to the prime rib, in case you prefer it." It was a small, almost pathetic gesture, but it was a massive, seismic shift coming from a woman who had once served me nothing but a plain, undressed salad. "Thank you, Genevieve," I said simply. "Salmon sounds perfect." The change wasn't complete, but the work was visible. The commitment to change, though painfully slow, continued to redefine the Harringtons. Genevieve, while still guarded, no longer possessed the power to make me disappear. She and Liam maintained their boundaries, and to her credit, she never once overtly tried to undermine me again. Her fear of losing Liam, a fear that Dr. Hayes had correctly identified, was a more powerful motivator than her need for control. She had traded her power over the system for a place within it, diminished but not eliminated. My own life, freed from the crushing anxiety of performance and exclusion, truly began to flourish. My speech therapy practice grew, and I launched a successful online course for parents of children with communication disorders. Liam, now fully engaged in our partnership, was my greatest support. He helped me navigate the administrative side of my business and openly celebrated my professional success, the very success Genevieve had once dismissed. Our relationship was no longer a frantic effort to keep peace, but a strong, resilient partnership built on mutual respect and transparent communication. One rainy Saturday afternoon, as Liam and I were volunteering at a local community center, a small, non-glamorous event that Genevieve would never have attended, we talked about our future. Specifically, we talked about children. We had tabled the conversation during the crisis, knowing we couldn't bring a child into a toxic environment. But now we were stable. We were strong. We were happy. We decided it was time to actively try. 3 weeks later, the most profound change in our lives arrived unexpectedly, in the form of 2 faint, pink lines on a pregnancy test. I stared at the test, tears welling up. Tears of joy, of course, but also of overwhelming relief that this had happened in the after, not the before. When we shared the news with Arthur and Genevieve, their reactions were a final, poignant measure of how far we had come and how far we still had to go. Arthur's face lit up with immediate, genuine joy. He stood up and hugged me, something he had never initiated before. "This is wonderful, Ava. Absolutely wonderful. I'm going to be a grandfather again." Genevieve's reaction was more complex. A complex mixture of genuine, maternal joy and, inevitably, calculation. "A grandchild," she said, her voice catching with emotion she rarely showed. Then the old pattern began to surface. "I will need to prepare the guest room immediately as a nursery for when you visit. I'll call the designer first thing tomorrow. And the baby registry, I'll take care of the essentials, the crib, the stroller, everything European." Liam met my eyes across the table, reading my discomfort perfectly. He placed his hand over mine, his grip firm. "Mom," he said, his voice calm, polite, but unwavering, "we appreciate the thought, but let us take things one step at a time. We live in Boca Raton, and we will handle the nursery there. We will discuss visiting arrangements and gifts that work for everyone as the pregnancy progresses. We want to do this our way." Genevieve's smile tightened, the familiar sign of suppressed frustration, but she nodded, accepting the boundary. "Of course. I'm just excited. I only want the best for my first Granch. Your fourth grandchild, Genevieve, Brooke interjected softly but firmly, smiling slightly from across the room. Remember Ethan and Chloe's too, and my son. But yes, incredibly exciting. The unified front was now a reality, no longer just a therapeutic goal. Later, in private, Liam reassured me, wrapping me in a tight hug. Our child will never experience what you did, Ava. We will make sure of that. We set the rules now. I believed him. The man who had once been unable to stand up to his mother was now committed to protecting both me and our unborn child from toxic family dynamics, no matter the cost. As my pregnancy progressed, I reflected often on the lessons of the past year. Standing up for myself that night at Genevieve's table had been terrifying, a profound risk, but it was absolutely necessary. It forced a crisis that ultimately led to a slow, painful healing that never could have occurred otherwise. I learned that maintaining your dignity sometimes requires risking your closest relationships, and that real, foundational love includes respect and protection. I learned that families can change, but only when brave individuals refuse to participate in the dysfunctional patterns. And most importantly, I learned that creating family is about more than blood or marriage certificates. It's about building a partnership based on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Our daughter, named Eliza, arrived in the quiet of a New England autumn. Her arrival solidified the new normal. Genevieve, for all her past machinations, was genuinely in love with her granddaughter. She was still Genevieve. She sent expensive, impractical outfits from Paris, and she still corrected my choice of organic baby food. But she was a doting, if overly assertive, grandmother, and most importantly, she respected the boundaries Liam enforced. We established a clear set of rules. Visits were limited to 2 days a week, always scheduled, and unsolicited advice was politely deflected. When Genevieve once tried to slip $15,000 into Eliza's college fund with the casual statement, "I'm just ensuring her future is properly managed," Liam immediately returned the check with a firm, "Thank you, Mom. But we manage Eliza's finances as a couple." The old Genevieve would have exploded or resorted to emotional blackmail. The new Genevieve simply sighed, apologized, and tried a less aggressive approach the following week. She was learning to live within the system we had established. The positive change wasn't just limited to the three of us. The entire family found a healthier, more authentic dynamic. Ethan and Chloe were openly warm and supportive, often calling to check in on me specifically. Brooke and I developed a genuine bond, trading funny stories about the ridiculous expectations we had both grown up under. And Arthur, now a fully retired and much happier man, spent his time building a beautiful wooden cradle for Eliza and spending quiet afternoons with Phoebe, their old flame having settled into a comfortable, enduring friendship that Genevieve now openly tolerated. Our family photo today, the one that sits proudly on our mantelpiece, includes not just Liam and me, but Phoebe, Arthur, Ethan, Chloe, Brooke, and yes, even Genevieve. It is not a perfect family. There are still tensions, still moments of awkward silence, and the work of setting and maintaining boundaries is ongoing. But it is a family where everyone is seen, included, and genuinely valued. It's a family system that, against all odds, chose repair over rupture. I look at Eliza now, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and I feel a profound sense of gratitude for the painful journey that brought us here. Standing up for myself that night at the dining table, risking everything, was the hardest and best decision I ever made. The empty plate that once symbolized my exclusion led, ironically, to a fuller life than I could have ever imagined. a life where my voice matters and my place is secure. If you have ever faced similar struggles with in-laws or family dynamics, if you are sitting at a table where you feel invisible, remember this: you deserve respect and inclusion. Standing up for yourself may be frightening, but remaining silent only ensures that nothing will ever change. Your voice matters. Your place at the table matters. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, creating healthy family relationships is always worth the difficult work it requires. Now, tell me in the comments below, have you experienced challenges with in-laws who made you feel excluded? How did you handle it? I would love to hear your stories of courage. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they, too, deserve a place at the table.